covering a whole range of issues that are topical issues for expats living and working abroad. So welcome to us today, and let's get on straight with it. If you've got a question for this event, you can leave it in the live notes, or you can leave it afterwards, and we'll follow it up with you and give you that update in the weeks ahead. But what Proact is all about is giving expatriate advice for family and business that are living and working abroad. As a UK-based business, we've got expertise in the EU and around the world for those UK expats. So what we do when we do our live webinar each Wednesday webinar, it's 11 o'clock UK time, we feature questions and answers, and we also feature topical news and subjects for expats that are living and working abroad. And what we thought we'd do today is rather than fix on a particular topic, what we want to do is run through some topical news items in the show and give you some food for thought that can help you as an expat living and working abroad. Our first story this week is Little Paris. Little Paris is a European destination which could work very well for expats in general, but nomads in particular. We featured recently how in the EU, the Schengen Zone rules apply, which applies peculiar 90 in 180-day rule, which doesn't necessarily apply in other countries around the world. So when you go into the an EU country or into the EU Schengen Zone on a visa, you can only stay for 90 days in any 180-day period. So if you're doing that as a working person, one place to consider is Little Paris, which is Romania. Romania, the capital city of Bucharest, it's a big city. It's a traditional old European city. So you've got the architecture and the little street cafes, but you've also got the internet and fairly low Airbnb prices. So if you don't want to be a resident, you can go and have a 90-day stay in a European country like Romania, Bucharest, work from there, use a short-term Airbnb type of location to work without becoming a tax resident over there. So you don't have any tax residency restrictions. You don't have a visa requirement as a UK expat. You don't have a visa requirement as an EU citizen going to live and work in Romania, because residency is not the same as tax residency. And therefore you can go and live and work there for a short period of time and enjoy Little Paris at a slightly smaller cost than the full-on Eiffel Tower approach. For more information and guidance on expat locations for nomad and remote working, contact us at partnership.com. The next topic we want to look at today is just a refresh on the EU Schengen Zone. We've said recently that residency visas are coming in the next few are required for non-EU citizens where there's no visa-free travel. But visa-free travel is also going to require electronic travel authorities from 2024. Again, this doesn't stop a nomad going about their business in the EU. What it does do is restrict the nomad for spending more than 90 days in one EU country within a 6-month period. So generally, under international rules, you can move from country to country for 90 days at a time. And if you've got visa-free travel, you don't necessarily need any entry visa for that period. That's under international rules. For the EU, they're introducing their travel authorities, which will help implement the 90 and 180-day rule for anyone who has got a visa-free travel into the EU, in the same way that someone who needs a Schengen visa is restricted to that 90 and 180-day rule as well. So as long as a nomad keeps working, and as long as they plan their EU working so that not working more than 90 days in 6 months in one EU country, or if you need a Schengen visa more than 90 days in the EU, then it's entirely possible to keep moving on and getting that movement done. Romania, Bulgaria, and Cyprus are not in the Schengen zone yet. Cyprus completed the 5th of 6 stages and joined the information sharing system for the Schengen zone. And it could be that Bulgaria, Romania, and Cyprus come into the EU Schengen zone within by the end of 23 into 24. But the mechanism is already in place to enforce this as soon as the rules are applied. So watch out for that, and any more information and guidance on the Schengen rules for expats that want to nomad work around Europe, contact us at perkpartnership.com. The next subject we want to discuss this week is pain in Spain. And it's a common theme, and it's about international driving licenses. If you're an EU expat relocating within the EU, you don't necessarily need to change your driving license. So within the EU, there isn't a compulsion to change your driving license. So you can drive on a Greek passport in Spain or a Cyprus passport in Germany without that need to change it. However, for countries that are outside the EU, including European Economic Area countries, so again, just to confuse matters, we talked about the Schengen zone in driving licenses. The rules are not uniform between the two. Schengen zone is about residency and visas. Now talking about driving licenses. So if you're coming from Norway, for example, you may need to change your driving license and be able to do that. Currently, the UK is not on a list of EU that's approved with the EU to automatically exchange a driving license. What that means is that you may have to take a test, both the theory test and the driving test again, to get your driving license in your locality. If you're a nomad working and you're going to work in that second location for up to 90 days, then of course you can use your home driving license. Under international driving license rules, you can travel and use that local driving license. But if you're staying over 90 days, you need to then have a resident permit to be able to use that driving license. Or you could use an international driving license, but you have to have that issued from your home country before you leave. Or the third version is that you have to exchange your passport within that 6-month period. So not all countries can do that. There are certain countries within the EU that can exchange that if they've got a reciprocal agreement on driving licenses, which doesn't include the UK at the moment. So the pain in Spain is that the post-Brexit, the Spanish are now clamping down on that. They give a notice that from the 16th of March 23, the 6-month period is ticking down. So under international law, you're allowed to use your home passport for 6 months, your home driving license for 6 months in another country, and then you have to change it or transfer it. EU citizens can freely change it. UK can't do that anymore. So what the Spain have done is from the 16th of March, given the UK expats living in Spain 6 months to change their driving license. In theory, they can do that with little pain, just the appropriate paperwork and residency permits, and then they would have the Spanish driving license with no problem under EU rules. After the 15th of September, the British expat will need to potentially go through a retest, including a theory and driving test in Spain to get a Spanish driving license if they're staying in Spain and wanted to drive for more than 3 months at a time. You can use an international driving license. That's another challenge, but the circumstances, if you're living and working in Spain, have changed, and you need to consider what you need to do to make that. Have in mind, if you haven't got a valid driving license for the country in which you're living in, you can't get insurance for a car. So it's not a system that you can cheat and hope you don't get caught, because you need to have your motor insurance to drive. So expats in Spain, UK expats in Spain, are well advised to change the driving license now before it's too late. Have in mind that most driving licenses issued in the last 10 years have got a limited period on them, maybe 10, maybe 15 years, certainly by the age of 70. So you're going to have to change it at some time anyway. And if you're not got a valid driving license, and then you're trying to, and in Britain, you can't renew your British driving license if you're not living in the UK. So if you're an expat, you can't renew it. So you have to then be enforced to do that in another country. So watch the time zones, watch the pain of that. If you're relocating abroad, consider getting your driving license changed if you can, or getting an international driving license before you go, or take your test again. For more information and guidance on international driving license rules for expats living and working abroad, contact us at propartnership.com. In Cyprus, interchange rules for driving licenses are basically based upon the EU rules, but they've got an additional list of 17 countries which can exchange the driving license freely, including Norway, but it doesn't include the UK. So you've got international driving license rules that apply. And so within 6 months, you need to change your driving license if you can, to avoid yourself. And without a valid driving license in the country, you cannot get motor insurance. You might be able to come, get sold a car, miss the trick. They'll give you 6 months motor insurance, but then you can't renew it because your driving license is invalid. So as part of the residency permit process, once you've got your residency permit, consider changing your driving license in Cyprus. For more information and guidance, contact us at propartnership.com. The next area we want to look at is a passport. I got these really fancy titles, and I misspoke my title. So let me say it again. The next topic for today is a passport drive. The driving license rules require you to change your driving license under international law with its own peculiar EU rules. And it's the same with passports. You need to be aware that when a British person or anybody is traveling abroad, then you need to have at least 6 months remaining on your passport when you travel out of the country. So even if you're going for a 1 or 2 week trip, you need to have 6 months remaining on your passport to be allowed to board and leave the country. And the people that enforce the right to board are the airlines, and they may let you check in, they may let you put your luggage into the hold, they may let you get through to departures, but they may not let you actually board on the plane. And if you get to the boarding gate and your passport doesn't match up, A Manchester guy found out recently, going on his summer holidays, that this can be a very, very difficult situation. It was left that the family made the choice that the wife and children boarded and flew, but his passport, because there wasn't 6 months left on the passport, he wasn't allowed to board. And that caused a lot of confusion, delay, and heartache for the family. So the summer holiday that they booked at the start of 23 to go to Croatia was scuppered by the fact that they didn't have the proper passport. The airline let them check in, the airport let them board, but when it came to the gate to get onto the plane, they're not allowed to do that. If that's ever happened to you, that you've got to the boarding gate and been dismissed, it's not a pretty experience. It's quite traumatic because you've gone through customs, you've effectively left the country. So you've done the baggage, you've gone through passport checks, and you're out of the country. You're in the duty-free zone. You've gone through the duty-free. You've had your coffee and what have you. You've gone to the gate to check in. If they refuse your boarding, then you have to be escorted off the premises. So it's not pretty to be escorted off the premises for something as trivial as only 6 months left on your passport. An online airline check-in won't necessarily pick that up, so it's something you need to be aware of. As an EU citizen, you don't travel within the EU. You've got freedom of movement. You don't travel with your passport. Now, at the moment, technically, as we said earlier today, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria are outside the Schengen zone, as is Ireland. But once they're inside, once you're inside the EU, you technically don't need a passport to travel around that EU. So you don't need to show that. You could just use your ID card, if at all. So you're not going to be refused your boarding, and you're going to that freedom of movement within the EU. This is what the Schengen zone protects. So you need to bear that in mind. So the big Brexit point here for UK expats is that post Brexit, you're no longer an EU member. So if you haven't got 6 months left on your passport, you will be stopped if you're trying to go to an EU country. And the Manchester family, the father had to cheat by driving through the Channel Tunnel. They didn't stop him on his passport there. He got onto the Channel Tunnel. Once he was in the EU, he was able to drive borderlessly to Croatia, losing a couple of days on his holiday to complete that. So he did cheat his way into the EU. Once you're illegal in the EU, they'll always let you back on your passport with your return flight, but you may face a penalty or a fine as they come to enforce the Schengen zone with the electronic travel authorities. So for more information and guidance on validity of passports or the need to get a residency permit to give you freedom of movement within the EU, contact us at productpartnership.com. So the next topic we want to discuss, I've lost my running order again, is frozen state. Are you in a frozen state as an expat? UK state pensions are indexed, even if a UK expat goes living and working abroad, as long as they live in a country with a reciprocal pension agreement. That is not all countries. It's not all Commonwealth countries. It's not all EU countries. It is certain countries. There needs to be a social insurance agreement and one that particularly allows for a pension indexation. So it's by no means comprehensive. And some of the countries where it does work, you'll actually be bizarre. So you could be in the Philippines or Turkey, have an indexed pension, but that won't necessarily apply if you're in Canada or Australia. So you need to be aware of which countries you're going to. And your UK state pension might not be indexed, even if you're fully qualified. It's further complicated by the fact that within the EU, you can only claim one state pension. So if you've got a state pension, if you're living and working in Cyprus, you can claim an EU Cyprus state pension, and you can claim it and use the reciprocal information from all the other EU countries. Now, if you're from the EU, if you're from Denmark or Germany or France, you can only claim one state pension, and that has to be claimed in the country in which you're living. So if you're living in Cyprus, but you could use all your contributions from all your EU countries over your working period to maximise your Cyprus pension. If you haven't got enough years, enough qualifying years, and you're living and working in and retire in Cyprus, then you may not get a pension from them. But that's the same in your home country. You've got to have enough qualifying years for that state pension. Once that's done, you then need to consider whether it's going to be indexed or not. So even though that we've had Brexit, UK expats there's still a reciprocal agreement with the EU and the UK for some benefits and for pension indexation on the state pension. So that can be quite a good thing for expats to receive and consider. So have a look at the situation. Have a look and consider where you're relocating. What is your best option? Do you claim 2 smaller state pensions from your home country and your resident country, or do you claim one big one because of a reciprocal social insurance agreement in the country in which you're resident? For more information and guidance, contact us at proactpartnership.com. The next topic we want to discuss today, got 2 more to go on. The next topic is the China Showdown. What's the China Showdown? We've all lived through COVID and Brexit, and we've seen the dramatic effect that the COVID lockdowns had on the world economy, and not to mention the people and the lifestyles, and to change the way people work, the way people live, to make living and working abroad remotely more effective for expats, as opposed to living and working abroad remotely down the road. So if you can work down the road with a good Airbnb and internet, why can't you work in Bucharest? Why can't you work in Cyprus? Why can't you work in Miami? So this is the principle that we've established, the dramatic business and cultural changes that we've had. But it had a big impact on inflation and the economy in general. So there's 3 big factors that you look at when you're looking at economic indicators. You look at inflation, you look at exports, and you look at property prices. And what we've seen recently is a very, very large Chinese property builder, Evergrande, going to receivership and collapse effectively. And that's a sign of what's going on in China. They kept their COVID lockdown for much longer than the rest of the world. I don't know the precise extra time, but let's say an extra year. And so they're behind the rest of the world. So all the struggles that we've had, they are behind that. And that in China now finding that themselves that they're in a deflationary position. Now, what's the difference between a recession and deflation? A bit. So a recession becomes a depression if it goes on for more than 6 months. If it goes on for 9 months or 12 months or more, a recession becomes a depression. Deflation is something slightly differently. And the problem with the companies like Evergrande and with the China in general, you've had this. These companies have had this booming economy where it's been growth for 10, 20 years and nothing else, irrespective of the economic conditions in the rest of the world, pretty much like Japan did until the end of the 1990s, when they suddenly hit in the 90s this dreadful period of stagnation and deflation. And when you get deflation, what it means is that all the money that you borrowed to do all the massive buildings of property, which they did in China, to build these properties that they would then sell. When you've got deflation and prices going down, you're not selling your goods and services for as much as you thought you were. So you borrowed the money at a price at $10, and now you can only sell it at the equivalent of $6. And therefore, you have to cut back and cut back and cut back to get more sales to pay off your debt. And that is what deflation is. It's a decreasing circle rather than increasing circle, where prices are going down, and so activity and expenses and spending has to go down so they can meet the needs to repay the borrowing. And that's where China is at the moment. So it's a very unusual situation we've got in the world now, where China has been a big engine of growth for the world for many years, but it's now a big recessionary, deflationary type of influence. Now we've got inflation in the rest of the world and the rest of the economies, which are still trying to manage Britain as bad as anybody. So China now, the global economy will move over the next year to export that deflation around the world with cheap prices and cheap deals in China while their economy adjusts. And the worst case scenario is they could end up in a long-standing period of stagnation like Japan did. So that's to wait and see. So there is a bit of a showdown in China with the slowdown, and it's not quite a China crisis yet, but there are big moves being made in China, and it will impact everybody around the world. One thing you may be able to get is cheap property if you go and invest in China at the moment. The final topic for today that we want to look at is the UK trying to curry favour with India. Ever since Brexit, Boris Johnson and now Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, made a big play about getting a trade deal with China. With India. When we talk about China and India, we're talking about a third of the world's population. Nearly 3 billion people in those two countries, both a similar sort of size, about 1.4 billion people. So if a trade deal can be done with India as a country with a population of 3 times that of Europe, then it gives some scope for UK trade to expand and grow post-Brexit. This is the idea of Brexit, is that the world economy is much bigger than the Indian than the European economy, and therefore there's more scope for entrepreneurship, investment, and trade for it to grow with more people around the world. And Asia is obviously a very vibrant, dynamic, up-and-coming area of the world where the UK is trying to establish stronger trading ties, which were undermined during this period of EU membership. The great thing that India have got is they've got a much younger population than China. So China's deflationary period, if their race is to get out of that deflation before their population ages and they become straddled like Europe with an aged, retired, not working, not productive population, which is where the stagnation and the rigidity comes from the European Union. So this is what the advantage that India's got. There's a big UK India summit in September, and it could possibly lead to the trade deal being signed. We will see. And that will be a great way to open up opportunities for business and expats to trade together. UK expats moving into India to do more business, but also Indian expats coming to the UK to work. One of the key areas that still need to resolve is movement of people, and the Indians looking for more flexibility, more freedoms for Indians to come and work in the UK with visas. The UK is as restrictive as the EU for letting people in at the moment. You need to be able to establish an income of an employment to be able to come and work from outside the UK. Of 25,000 or more to actually get your foothold in the UK. So there are those demands, and are you going to let that talent come from India? This is the question that is sticking for the Indians, and we'll look forward to see if we get that resolution and open up that continent for the UK and India to start trading again and working together to build a platform of business into the second half of the 21st century. So that's it for today. We've covered our topics. What we've done is we've said that nomads that want to live and work abroad, you don't have to stick to an EU location like headline like Paris. There's little Paris in Bucharest, which has got charm and affordability around that. But the EU Schengen Drone holds you down to and restricts you to 90 and 180 days in any 6-month period. There's pain in Spain, where post-Brexit rule changes mean that UK expats are being forced to change their driving license now under EU rules, or have to do it under post-EU rules in the future, which means they would need residency and need to do the exchange within 3 months if that country permits it. So there's big changes that could be paid there. So there's some pain in Spain. The EU drive to enforce the Schengen zone and the 90 and 180 day rule for people living and working abroad works great for nomads. But if you want to have anything beyond 80 days in country, then you do need to have a residency permit. And for more information and guidance on that, you can contact us at productpartnership.com. We said that there's a frozen state pension. Expat pensions are being frozen out with pensions that are crashing living and working abroad, but also travellers, when you're travelling abroad, your passport needs to have at least 6 months before you start travelling. So you travel abroad, your driving license will last up to 6 months, but generally any 90-day short trip, your driving license will work, but you have to change it within 6 months generally. A passport, you've got to have 6 months left on it after you return. Otherwise, you might get stopped at check-in and have to be kicked out of the airport. So think about that. On a wider scale, economically, globally, there's a China showdown as they go into a recession, which could become a depression or an extended deflationary period, which will have a knock-on effect around the world. And it could end up balancing all the excesses post-COVID and post-Brexit. And we just have to wait and see on that. But meanwhile, post-Brexit, the British Indian summit in September could make some significant progress towards a post-Brexit trade deal, which would open up the British trading market with the Indian 1.4 billion population to allow more freedom of movement for expat family and business that want to live and work abroad. I hope you found it interesting today. Thanks a lot for listening. If you've got more questions, ask us either. I haven't got any questions at the moment, but you can ask them in the notes below this video that you're watching now, or you can email us at contact us at productpartnership.com. So Product Partnership, contact us, and you can give us your questions, and we offer a free review and guidance for expats living and working abroad. And you can also subscribe, and we offer online advice and guidance, as well as tax returns and reports for expats living and working abroad. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you again next time.